So that's religion. Morality. Morality, Collins' dictionary defines morality as system of principles and values concerning people's behaviour, which is generally accepted by a society or by a particular group of people. And I will be using the word sila, the Sanskrit word sila, in this talk, which means, you could translate it as morality, you could translate it as right conduct. So as I say, much of what I'm going to be saying is based on the lecture that Bhante gave in 1981 in Pune, in India. So he's embarked on a sort of winter lecture tour all over, I think it was Maharashtra state. And it's a talk about Dr Ambedkar. And it's a talk about Buddhism as a force for social transformation. And Bhante begins, now apologies here if I'm repeating some things that maybe Samudra Ghosh said last week. I wasn't here and the fates deemed it wasn't recorded, so I don't know what he said. So you might have heard these stories before, but it's often good to hear them again, isn't it? So in his lecture, Bhante begins by taking 3 examples from Ambedkar's life that he sees as having a profound effect on Dr Ambedkar, on the man. So the first was very young. So Ambedkar, Bhimrao Ambedkar, is 5 or 6 years old, and he's been living in sort of military quarters. His father was in the army, so they've been living quite a sort of closeted life in a way, in sort of the army accommodation and sort of culture, I suppose. And then his father retires, and they need to leave and go out into the sort of wider world. And no barber in the town where they move to will cut young Bhimrao Ambedkar's hair. He's 5 or 6 years old, and he realises, they sort of go around, obviously, looking for someone to cut his hair. Nobody will cut his hair. And in the end, his elder sister cuts his hair for him. And at that age, that tender age, it's almost unimaginable, he realises that nobody will cut his hair because he is an untouchable. He's a part of the untouchable caste, and people don't want to be anywhere near him. So at a similar time in his life, his father was staying in another town, and he wrote to his family asking them to come and visit him. And at this point, Bhimrao Ambedkar's mother died when he was sort of 5 or 6, so she died when he was very young. So he sends for the family to come and visit him, and so the family is his older brother and sister and himself. So they're travelling on their own. They're travelling in their best clothes, and it's a big deal. It's the first time he's ever been on a train, and they travel to where his father is staying. And they get to the station, and his father is not there to meet them. The message has gone awry. And so these 3 young beings, again, Bhimrao is 5 or 6 years old at this point. They need a taxi to get to where his father is, because it's quite a distance from the station. And in India at that time, a taxi would be a bullock cart. And they can find nobody. They can find nobody to drive them on a bullock cart. In the end, I think by this point it's got dark, somebody agrees to sort of lend them the cart but refuses to drive them. So eventually the young Bhimrao, this sort of 5, 6-year-old boy, drives in the dark to go to where their father is. Nobody will give them any water to drink either at this point, and they end up needing to drink out of a dirty stream that they find on their way. And again, it's this story of this young young boy, I mean, I find it so difficult to think about, actually. I have a 5-year-old nephew. The thought of him being treated in that way and having to undergo that experience, well, it's unthinkable, actually. But this was the reality for not just the young Bhimra Ambedkar, but millions of others in India at that time. And again, he realised, well, this is because I'm an untouchable. We are untouchable. We're born into that caste. So the third instance in Ambedkar's life that Bhante draws out is when Ambedkar is older. So at this point, I think he would be Dr Ambedkar, as he's in probably his early mid-20s. And he needs to move to the Baroda state. He's come back from England having been, I think he's doing a master's in economics or something like that. But anyway, some education, and he's been sponsored by the Baroda state, by some very progressive thinking officials in the Baroda state to do his studies. So he needs to come back and work for them. He's sort of beholden to them in a way because they sponsored his education. So he moves to the Baroda city to take up this position in the government, and he can find nowhere to stay. Nowhere will rent him a room, and he goes all over the place, and he cannot find anywhere to live, basically. And in the end, he goes to the Parsi quarter of the city and gives a false name, tries to pass himself off as a Parsi. And he's given a room, but quite quickly, within a couple of days, they realise who he is. I think in India, people, certainly in those days, and possibly still now, actually, are very want to know what your caste is and want to kind of find out about you in that way. And I think word had got round that this untouchable man was working in a government office, and they realised that it was him. And he was beaten, chased out of that place. This very well-educated, well-dressed man who'd have been behaving impeccably was chased out of a room, and I think I've got this right. I think he could no longer do that job. I think he had to leave. And that was Parsis as well. So Parsis are not part of the Hindu faith, but because they've been part of the culture for so long, sort of hundreds and hundreds of years, it's sort of indoctrinated into them. They're sort of under the influence of centuries of the caste system. They too felt it was all right to behave in that way. It was sort of justified. So Bhante said these three things had a really profound effect on Ambedkar. He sort of saw it's a truly terrible thing that human beings could treat other human beings in this way. And eventually, he was so dissatisfied with Hinduism and the caste system that it professes, that he gave it up. He famously declared, "Though I have been born a Hindu, I will not die a Hindu." How could he continue to operate within this fundamentally flawed system of beliefs? And as Siddhi was saying earlier, he tried politics to transform. So he was really involved in a lot of high-level discussions and committees, and he basically drafted the Indian constitution himself, the constitution that sort of set up India after the end of the British rule. He'd been so deeply involved in all of that, and still the change wasn't happening, the transformation wasn't happening. And he saw, he tried politics to change, and it became clearer to him that a deeper transformation was needed. A deeper transformation was needed. So Ambedkar didn't give up Hinduism and leave it at that. He could have just given up Hinduism and sought no replacement in a way. But he sought to adopt a new religion. And Bhante, in his talk, he gives 3 reasons why he thinks this was. So he says, Ambedkar was a deeply religious man. He had strong feelings of faith and devotion. He said Ambedkar was somebody who was convinced humans could not live without religion, could not be happy or successful without it. And religion, in the sense of morality, is the governing principle of every society. So it governs the underlying views of people, and therefore society. And I'm sort of minded again of Bhante's definition, one of Bhante's definitions of religion, the complete psychological and spiritual wholeness of religion, was what Ambedkar saw was completely, absolutely key in creating a new society. So Ambedkar wanted to create a new society, a society founded on morality. And he saw religion as necessary to do this. And he chose Buddhism. So he shopped around, he did shop around. I mean, he was an incredibly well-read man. So he would have investigated all the different religions. But he was also quite heavily courted. Once he'd made his statement, I may have been born a Hindu, but I will not die a Hindu. All the major religions were like, because he had a big following at this point of other untouchables, got in touch and said, "How about us?" Sort of did a plug for their religion. He chose Buddhism because of the importance Buddhism gives to morality. And this is a quote from something Ambedkar wrote himself, Buddha and the Future of His Religion, one of his sort of key writings. So Ambedkar says, the religion of the Buddha is morality. It is embedded in religion. Buddhist religion is nothing if not morality. It is true that in Buddhism there is no God. In place of God, there is morality. What God is to other religions, morality is to Buddhism. And we can see sort of Buddhist morality as very clearly crystallized, I think, in the 5 or the 10 silas, or the 5 or the 10 precepts, right conducts, right views, the kind of sort of outline, the fundamental values of Buddhism. But Dr. Ambedkar spoke in terms of the fundamental tenets of liberty, equality and fraternity. Which I wonder if he did get that from the French Revolution, actually. Don't know, but no.
He says it's from my master, the Buddha. That's a quote.
Oh, really? Okay. In case Zoom didn't hear that, apparently Ambedkar said that the liberty, equality and fraternity were from his master, the Buddha. Thank you. So liberty. Bhante says liberty, he sees liberty as something external, defining something external. So a society organised on proper principles. So freedom he sees as more talking about something internal, sort of the mind reaching the higher consciousness. But he says almost without exception, people have to experience liberty before they can experience internal freedom. It's incredibly difficult to develop your mind, to elevate your mind, to raise your level of consciousness without the liberty, political, social, economic, intellectual, religious liberty. It's incredibly difficult to evolve if your energies are taken up fighting oppressions without, having your basic freedoms. It's It's incredibly difficult to evolve. Equality, and equality not in that everybody is the same, but as in everyone has the same right to develop as a human being. And I'm sort of minded of the parable of the rain cloud, where all the different plants, all the different sort of individual beings, but they all have equal access to the rain of the Dharma. Buddhism sees all people as human beings and wants them all to grow. And Bhante points out when the Buddha first taught his first disciples, he sends them out to teach into the world. And he doesn't say, don't bother about teaching those people, just teach these people. He sends them out to teach absolutely anybody who will listen, basically, anyone who shows an interest. And fraternity, it comes from the word, the Latin word for brother, and it's basically describing how you would feel towards your own sibling, so your own brother or sister, but a deeper, wider, not limited to blood. In Buddhism, all human beings are our siblings. That's quite a strong statement, actually, but that is what we're aiming for. It's natural that we should all love one another. Fraternity is essentially metta. It's essentially unselfish love, a heartfelt desire for the happiness of other beings, all beings. And of course we have the metta bhavana practice to help us cultivate loving kindness towards all beings. So Dr Ambedkar, he didn't give up on religion. He chose a new one that was capable of giving a solid foundation to the new society. Buddhism embodies liberty, equality and fraternity. Sila, morality, is at Buddhism's heart. And the power of Buddhism is that you have to practice sila. You have to practice, we call it ethics sometimes too, morality. No one else can practice that for you. You can't just recite the precepts. You have to practice them too. Saying, I'm a Buddhist, is meaningless unless you are actively, habitually practicing sila, practicing ethics, actively training your mind to more skillful mental states, developing right views. And the practice of ethics, morality, sila, only exists when people practice it. The people practicing, of course, are the foundation of the new society. Bhante says, Buddhism does not exist in books. Buddhism exists in the lives of people. Buddhism does not exist in books. Buddhism exists in the lives of people. So eventually, Dr Ambedkar converted to Buddhism. And he then led approximately, on the day that he converted, 380,000 other untouchables converted to Buddhism with him, and then millions of people since then have also begun that revolution. Dr Ambedkar converted to Buddhism on the 14th of October 1956, and it's a day that we celebrate annually within Triratna, Dharma Revolution Day, or I call it Ambedkar Day, but I don't know if anyone else ever does call it. I think I might have made that up. But I think about it as celebrating Dr Ambedkar. But of course it's also, well, in celebrating Dr Ambedkar, you are celebrating the extraordinary transformation that he began. And I will say, this year, so we celebrate it close to the 14th of October every year. This year, Sunday the 17th of October, a few weeks' time, we've got an absolutely cracking afternoon for Dr Ambedkar Day, Dharma Revolution Day. We've got, not only have we got a sort of Zoom link with India, with Indian friends in the Sangha, will be part of Dharma Revolution Day live here. We've also got Vajratara is coming to give a talk. And for those of you who are not familiar with Vajratara, for my money, she's one of our movement's best speakers. She's extraordinary. I highly, highly recommend coming along. She's coming here. She'll be here in person. So if you're sort of interested and you'd like to just hear her, to be honest, she's great, then come along and celebrate this extraordinary day in history that so many more people need to know about and don't. But it's a really important day in our calendar, and it's going to be a great celebration of it. Sunday the 17th of October. So, what does this story of what happened in India several decades ago have to do with us sitting here now in Cambridge in 2021? I mean, well, it certainly tells us of the appalling inequality of the caste system, and the revolution of what Dr Ambedkar started continues today. It's an ongoing process. Caste has not been, the inequalities and the injustices of caste have not been eradicated from Indian society or from Hindu society. And if you're moved to find out more, do go to karana.org. It's a trust, charity that's been going for about 40 years. It's part of our Triratna movement. It focuses on projects with marginalised communities within India and also Nepal around education, dignified livelihoods, helping gender inequality. You can give, you can support them financially, or you can do an appeal for them. And I would say if you want to transform society and other people's lives in India and transform your own life, do an appeal. Look into it. And if we don't see the teaching of how Buddhism is a force for social transformation for all societies, I think we're really missing the true depth and power and beauty of Dr Ambedkar's example. Just how fundamentally important morality is, and Buddhist morality. In his lecture that I've been referring to, Bhante says that our Western society, once held together by Christianity, is beginning to fall to pieces. Now, he said that in 1981, so that's 40 years ago. Is our society falling to pieces? I'm not going to attempt to answer that question, but I think it's a question worth asking. What views underlie our current society? Is our current society here in the one that we're living in? Is it one of liberty, equality and fraternity? So I thought a bit about it. And I came up with some views that I think underlie our societies. I imagine we'll all have different perceptions of it. But my sense is there's a strong view of looking after number one, the cult of me, and putting my happiness first. I think there's a strong view of success being related to wealth, power and celebrity. And I think there is definitely, I felt very strongly, particularly at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, a recognition of the need for kindness and connectedness. Felt that really strongly. I feel like it's fading a little bit into the background now. I feel like people are sort of more concerned again with sort of their individual needs and wants. But for a while there, it did open up a little bit. And what are our society's views? What are our society's views around race, class? This is to name a very few. The huge inequalities between the rich and the poor, poverty, homelessness. And what are our views? What are our views? It can be easy to say, I'm a Buddhist, I believe in equality. But to really transform ourselves, and therefore to really transform society, we have to be actively working with our minds and rooting out that greed, hatred and delusion. Rooting out those views based around those, what's the word? Taints, I suppose. Poisons, maybe you could call them. So does our society embody the values of liberty, equality and fraternity? Maybe it does if you're comfortably off and you're sort of living a fairly easy life. What if you're poor? What if you're a person from a black ethnic minority background? What if you're a refugee? How is our society relating to those people? So if I look into my mind, I know in principle I believe in the best for all people, but it doesn't take long to find some ill will, some lack of kindness and well-wishing to people who hold different views to me, maybe look differently to me. And these are the mindsets, this sounds quite strong, but I think it's true. These are the mindsets that lead to oppression. These are the mindsets that lead to division. I think something that I feel quite strongly about, and it'd be interesting to hear when we sort of talk in our groups. There's a lot of division in our society. There's a lot of very different views on things. And I was sort of reflecting on, we're talking about social transformation, transforming society. And of course, there are all kinds of things that we can get involved with, and maybe quite rightly so, around sort of movements that are seeking to change the environment, political movements. There's all kinds of things that you can get involved with around social change. But if you're not really careful with working with morality, working with sila, working with your mind, about not treating the kind of enemy or the sort of people that perhaps you perceive as perpetrating whatever it is you're trying to change. If you're not treating your enemy as your sibling, as your brother or your sister, you've lost your morality. And I was thinking of the example of Dr Ambedkar, and how it can be, it can be so easy, maybe I should just talk for myself, it can be so easy for me to sort of not agree with something somebody's doing or view something in society and like that's wrong, and kind of get into ill will about it and anger maybe even. But that's when you lose touch with the basis. That's when you lose touch actually with liberty, equality and fraternity. And I think that is why morality is such a force and such a power of change, because if you can stand for what you believe and what you see to be right, what you're sort of training your mind in those values, and continue to communicate and treat others with that same respect, I think you can do extraordinary things. And I think that's what Dr Ambedkar did. So, I've sort of heard people say this before, like, oh, if you're all about love and not about hate, and you're about treating everyone equally, then you're just going to be a bit wishy-washy, and you're going to be a bit of a, hippy-dippy, whatever, bit of a walkover, maybe. And if you do ever sort of find yourself wondering about that, I really urge you to look at Dr Ambedkar's life, because he was somebody who very strongly held these principles of non-violence, non-hatred, but stood so strongly for what he believed to be sort of true and right, based on his morality. He would very strongly say if he disagreed with somebody's point of view or what somebody was doing, but he would always treat people with absolute respect. And I think, he had a lot of difficulties and differences with Gandhi. But he sort of talked about him and related to him, even though he was often, I think, quite angry and sort of opposed to what he was doing. He talked about him with a great deal of respect. And I do recommend, if you're interested in the life of Dr Ambedkar, there's a film on YouTube about his life, which is really good. I mean, I won't lie, it's not going to win any prizes for filmmaking, probably. It's a bit, I don't know, some of the acting's a bit not so good, and it's a bit, I don't know. And it's also 3 hours long. I'm not selling this well, but if you want to get a sense of the man, a sense of his life, a sense of the extraordinariness of how he behaved, who he was, what he did, it's really good. And the guy who plays Ambedkar is excellent, I think, actually. So I do recommend it. It's free to watch on YouTube. You can always do it in instalments. That's what I did, rather than doing the whole thing in one go. Yes. I've gone slightly off-piste. So I think what Ambedkar is teaching us is that we need a completely new basis for our society. He chose to sort of stay in India at that time, but he was very clear that it needed to be a fundamental shift in religion, shift in those deepest values, the things that you hold most dear to you, I think was something along the lines of the definition that I was talking about earlier. So we can be physically in society, but what we're doing with our minds and our actions can be deeply radical, actually. And I think that is one of the potentials of Buddhism as a religion and practicing Buddhist ethics, Buddhist sila. And there's no limit, I remind you of what something Viru Joji said, there's no limit to how far you can go with that. How far can you go with treating everybody as your sibling? I mean, that's quite an extraordinary thought, actually. And I think on retreat it's funny enough, I was talking with Angie this morning, who's on Zoom. Hello, Angie. And she's just back from a retreat. She was at Taraloka last week. And just listening to her talk about the experience, I'm not going to be able to remember the word she used, but it was something about being in this sort of beautiful environment of a retreat. You are a little society whilst you're on retreat, actually. You sort of make a little community. And it's a taste of what that new society could be like, actually. And she talked about it as feeling so kind of open and open and connected to the world, and yet very sort of somehow very, very beautiful. I probably haven't done that justice, sorry Angie, but it really struck me as we can get a taste of that new society. We can get it in little glimmers just coming here and sort of talking with each other and exploring things and going deeper, and we've got so many different ways that we can explore that together. So the new society begins with ourselves, and it's simply made up of each of us practicing, fearlessly examining our own views, our own minds, and we have a real potential to be a true force for good in the world. Buddhist morality, sila, the heart of Buddhism, gives us the framework and the practices we need to transform. And it's up to us to practice them and to embody them more and more, and to speak and to act from that truth. And I think what Ambedkar really shows us is that is the key, actually, to transforming society. So I will leave it there. There might be all sorts of things come up that you would like to talk about in your groups, and please do. But I've got a couple of questions. So what views are you aware of that currently underlie our society? What views do you sort of, what come to your mind when you think about that? And how can we embody the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity in our own lives? How can we embody the principles of liberty, equality and fraternity in our own lives? So if the team would like to raise their hands, there may be a